Michael Chen had been working at Metropolitan Hospital for 2 years, but he'd never been called to the VIP wing before. The elevator ride to the top floor felt different somehow. Everything was quieter up here, more polished. Even the air smelled expensive, like fresh flowers and cleaning products that actually worked. "You'll be taking over Mrs. Harrington's case," Dr. Patterson told him as they walked down the hallway. The older doctor had been Michael's supervisor since he started his residency. "She's been with us for 6 months now. Coma patient. Very high-profile family, so we need our best people on this." Michael felt both honored and nervous. At 28, he was one of the youngest residents in the hospital, and being trusted with a VIP patient meant his superiors had faith in him. But it also meant more pressure, more scrutiny. They stopped outside room 1207. Through the window, Michael could see a woman lying motionless in the bed, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed. Fresh flowers filled every available surface, and someone had hung expensive-looking curtains that definitely weren't hospital standard. "Victoria Harrington," Dr. Patterson said, checking his tablet. 32 years old. Car accident last March. She's stable, but there's been no change in her condition since she arrived. The family is very involved, visits almost every day. Her fiancé especially." Michael nodded, taking in the information. 6 months in a coma. That was a long time. He'd read about cases where patients woke up after years, but the odds weren't great. "One more thing," Dr. Patterson added, his voice dropping lower. "The family is very particular about her care. They've requested minimal handling. Change her IV, check her vitals, but keep everything else standard. They have their own private nurses who come in to handle personal care." Something about that didn't sit right with Michael, but he simply nodded. He was used to families having specific requests, especially wealthy ones who were used to getting their way. When he finally entered the room alone an hour later, Michael took his time. He always did this with new patients, even ones who couldn't respond. He believed in treating every person with dignity, whether they were awake to appreciate it or not. "Hello, Victoria," he said softly, approaching the bed. "My name is Dr. Chen. I'm going to be looking after you from now on." She was beautiful, even in her current state. Dark hair spread across the pillow, pale skin, delicate features. But something about her face looked troubled even in unconsciousness. Michael had noticed this before with coma patients. Sometimes they looked peaceful, but other times they seemed almost worried, as if their minds were struggling with something they couldn't escape. He began his examination, checking her pupils, her reflexes, her vital signs. Everything seemed normal for a patient in her condition. But when he checked her chart and compared it to what he was seeing, something caught his attention. The bandage on her left shoulder looked old, too old. He carefully pulled back her hospital gown and examined it more closely. The bandage was yellowed at the edges, and when he checked her chart, he saw it had supposedly been changed 3 days ago. But this bandage was at least a week old, maybe more. Michael frowned. This wasn't right. He carefully began removing the old bandage, and what he found underneath made his stomach turn. The wound from her accident had been healing, but the skin around it was red and irritated, not properly cared for, not the kind of care a patient in a VIP room should be receiving. "I'm going to take care of this," he told her, even though she couldn't hear him. He'd developed this habit in medical school. Talking to patients, even unconscious ones, made him feel less alone during long shifts. Some studies suggested they might be able to hear on some level, even if they couldn't respond. He spent the next 20 minutes carefully cleaning the wound and applying fresh bandages, much more thoroughly than the chart suggested had been done recently. As he worked, he talked to her about his day, about the weather, about nothing in particular. Just a gentle stream of conversation to fill the silence. "You've got a lot of people who care about you," he said as he finished up. "Your room is full of flowers. That's a good sign. It means people are thinking about you, waiting for you to come back." He was just finishing his notes when the door opened. A man in an expensive suit walked in, his shoes clicking on the floor. He was probably in his late 30s, with perfectly styled hair and the kind of watch that cost more than Michael made in a year. "Who are you?" the man asked, his tone sharp. "Dr. Chen. I'm Mrs. Harrington's new physician." "It's Miss Harrington," the man corrected coldly. "We're not married yet. I'm Richard Sterling, her fiancé." Michael extended his hand, but Richard barely shook it, his grip weak and dismissive. Instead, his eyes went immediately to Victoria, then to the fresh bandages visible at the edge of her hospital gown. "Why did you change her bandages?" Richard asked, his voice tight. They needed changing, Michael replied, keeping his tone professional. The wound wasn't being properly cared for. We have specific instructions about her care. Private nurses handle those things. With respect, Mr. Sterling, those nurses haven't been doing their job properly. The wound was showing signs of neglect. Richard's jaw tightened. For a moment, something flashed in his eyes. Anger, maybe. Or was it fear? Michael couldn't tell. I'll be speaking to Dr. Patterson about this, Richard said curtly. The family has very particular requirements about Victoria's care. Of course, Michael said calmly. But my first obligation is to my patient's health. If something isn't being done correctly, I have to address it. Richard didn't respond. He just sat down in the chair beside Victoria's bed, pulling out his phone. Michael took that as his dismissal and left the room. But something about the encounter bothered him. Why would someone be upset about a patient receiving better care? Over the next few days, Michael found himself thinking about Victoria more than his other patients. He'd stop by her room several times during his shifts, even when it wasn't strictly necessary. He'd check her vitals, adjust her blankets, make sure everything was perfect, and he always talked to her. He told her about the hospital gossip, about the terrible coffee in the cafeteria, about his younger sister who was studying law. He told her about his patients who were getting better, the small victories that made the long hours worthwhile. On his third day with her case, he noticed something during his evening visit. As he was changing her bandages again, properly this time, the way they should be changed, her heart rate increased slightly on the monitor. Just a small blip, barely noticeable, but Michael noticed. Victoria, he said softly, leaning closer. Can you hear me? Nothing. No movement, no response, just the steady beep of the machines. But Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something small, almost imperceptible. He made a note in her chart and decided to watch more carefully. Sometimes he thought miracles happen slowly. Sometimes they started with the smallest signs that most people missed. He just had to pay attention. And Michael Chen had always been very good at paying attention to details that others overlooked. As he left her room that night, he glanced back one more time. In the dim light from the hallway, Victoria Harrington looked almost like she was just sleeping. Not trapped, not unreachable, just sleeping, waiting for the right moment to wake up. Michael didn't know it yet, but that moment was coming sooner than anyone expected. And when it did, everything would change. It was close to midnight when Michael made his rounds on the VIP floor. The hospital was quieter at night, peaceful in a way it never was during the day. Most of the nurses were doing paperwork at their stations, and the only sounds were the distant beeps of monitors and the soft hum of ventilation systems. He'd been thinking about Victoria all day. That small change in her heart rate kept nagging at him. It could have been nothing, just a random fluctuation. But Michael had learned to trust his instincts, and something told him there was more to it. When he entered her room, he was surprised to find it empty. Usually, Richard was there at least once during the evening, sitting with his phone, barely looking at her. The nurses had mentioned he came like clockwork, staying for exactly 30 minutes before leaving. But tonight, the room was just Victoria and the machines keeping her alive. Michael did his usual checks first. Temperature, blood pressure, heart rate. Everything was stable. Then he moved to change her bandages, the task he'd been doing carefully every day since taking over her care. As he worked, he fell into his habit of talking to her. You know, Victoria, I think you'd like my sister. Her name is Linda. She's studying to be a lawyer, very determined. Kind of reminds me of you, actually. I did some reading about you. You run your family's company, or you did before the accident. That takes a lot of strength. He carefully removed the old bandage, pleased to see the wound was healing much better now. The redness was gone and the skin looked healthy. Proper care made all the difference. Your fiancé doesn't like me very much, Michael continued, cleaning the area gently. I can tell. He complained to Dr. Patterson about me changing your bandages. But here's the thing, this wound is healing now. Really healing. Whatever those private nurses were doing wasn't working. You deserve better care than that. As he applied the fresh bandage, he noticed something. The wound itself was healing well, but there was something underneath. A small bump he hadn't felt before. He pressed gently, trying to figure out what it was. I'm going to need to look at this more carefully, he said, reaching for his pen light. Don't worry, I'll be gentle. That's when he felt it. The slightest pressure against his hand. So light he almost thought he'd imagined it. He froze, his heart suddenly racing. Victoria? He whispered. He looked at her face. Nothing. Same peaceful expression, eyes closed. But on the monitor, her heart rate had jumped. Not dramatically, but noticeably. From 60 beats per minute to 75. Michael held his breath. He took her hand, the one that had been lying motionless for 6 months. Victoria, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand. Just a little bit. You can do it. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Michael was about to let go, convince himself he'd imagined the whole thing when he felt it again. A definite squeeze. Weak, barely there, but real. Oh my God, Michael breathed. He hit the call button for the nurse's station. I need help in room 1207 now. He kept holding her hand, watching her face intently. Come on, Victoria. Come back, you can do this. Follow my voice. Her eyelids fluttered. Just once, then stopped. Then again. Michael's hand was shaking now. That's it. Open your eyes. You've been sleeping long enough. 2 nurses rushed in. What's happening? She's waking up, Michael said, never taking his eyes off Victoria's face. Get Dr. Patterson now. The next few minutes felt like hours. Victoria's eyes kept trying to open, fluttering closed, then trying again. Her fingers gripped Michael's hand tighter, then relaxed. The monitors were going crazy, showing her body coming back to life after months of stillness. Finally, slowly, her eyes opened. Just a crack at first, then wider. They were green, Michael noticed. A deep, beautiful green. But they were also confused, frightened, darting around the room trying to make sense of things. It's okay, Michael said softly, moving into her line of sight. You're safe. You're in a hospital. My name is Dr. Chen. You've been in an accident, but you're going to be okay now. Victoria's mouth moved, trying to form words, but nothing came out. Her throat would be raw from the feeding tube she'd had for months. Don't try to talk yet, Michael said. Just breathe. Everything's going to be okay. Dr. Patterson rushed in, followed by 3 more nurses. The room became a flurry of activity as they checked her vitals, adjusted machines, prepared medications. Michael stepped back to give them room, but he kept his eyes on Victoria, who looked overwhelmed by all the sudden activity. Her eyes found his across the crowded room, and Michael gave her what he hoped was a reassuring smile. She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly blinked as if acknowledging him. The next hour was chaos. Dr. Patterson ran every test imaginable. Victoria's vitals were strong, stronger than expected for someone waking up after 6 months. She could move her fingers and toes. She could follow simple commands. But she couldn't speak yet, and she seemed very confused about where she was and what had happened. Someone had called Victoria's family, and they arrived like a storm. Her mother came first, an elegant woman in her 50s who burst into tears the moment she saw her daughter's open eyes. Her father, a stern-looking man in an expensive coat, stood in the corner looking shocked. And then Richard arrived, perfectly dressed despite the late hour. Victoria, darling, he said, rushing to her bedside. He tried to take her hand, but Victoria pulled it away, her eyes going wide. She looked scared, confused. She's disoriented, Dr. Patterson explained. It's normal. She doesn't understand what's happening yet. But Michael saw something else in Victoria's reaction. It wasn't just confusion. When Richard touched her, she'd looked genuinely frightened. And now, as Richard sat beside her bed talking about how worried he'd been, how happy he was that she was awake, Victoria kept looking away from him, her eyes searching the room as if looking for escape. Those eyes found Michael again, standing by the door, and something in her expression made his stomach turn. It was a plea, a silent cry for help. Everyone needs to step back, Dr. Patterson announced. The patient needs rest. You can see her tomorrow during visiting hours. Victoria's mother protested, but Dr. Patterson was firm. Eventually, they all filed out, though Richard lingered, staring at Victoria with an expression Michael couldn't quite read. When the room finally cleared, only Michael and 1 nurse remained, monitoring Victoria's vitals. She'd started to drift off, exhausted from the ordeal of waking up. But just before sleep claimed her again, she reached out and grabbed Michael's sleeve. He leaned closer. What is it? Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse and broken, but Michael heard the word clearly. Danger. Then her eyes closed and she was unconscious again, though this time it was just sleep, normal, healing sleep. Michael stood there for a long moment, her word echoing in his mind. Danger. What did she mean? Danger from what? From whom? He looked at the door where Richard had just left. remembering the fear in Victoria's eyes when her fiancé had touched her. And he remembered something else too. Richard's reaction when he'd first changed Victoria's bandages. The anger. The insistence that Michael follow the family's specific instructions about her care. Instructions that had led to her wound being neglected. Instructions that, if followed, might have kept her in that coma longer. Or forever. Michael pulled out his phone and opened the Notepad app. He began typing everything he'd observed, every detail that seemed off. He didn't know what any of it meant yet, but Victoria had woken up and immediately said she was in danger, and Michael Chen had not become a doctor to ignore when a patient told him they needed help. He watched her sleep for a few more minutes, noting how much more peaceful she looked now compared to her coma. She was fighting her way back, and whatever danger she'd warned him about, he was going to make sure she was protected, even if it meant going against one of the most powerful families in the city. Even if it meant risking everything he'd worked for. Some things were more important than career advancement. And keeping his patients safe had always been at the top of that list. Victoria's recovery over the next few days was remarkable. Her voice came back gradually, though it was rough and she couldn't talk for long periods. Her memory, however, was a different story. She remembered her name, her parents, her childhood. But the months before the accident were like looking through fog. She knew she ran her family's company. She knew Richard was her fiancé, but she couldn't remember why or how any of those things had come to be. What bothered Michael most was how she reacted to Richard. Every time he visited, Victoria would become quiet, withdrawn. Her heart rate would increase on the monitors. She'd answer his questions with short responses and always seemed relieved when he left. "You don't have to see him if you don't want to," Michael told her on the third day after she'd woken up. He was changing her bandages again, a task she'd insisted only he do. She didn't trust the private nurses, though she couldn't explain why. "He's my fiancé," Victoria said quietly, but there was no warmth in her voice. "I should want to see him, right? I should feel something when he walks in the room. What do you feel?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Scared. I feel scared and I don't know why. When he touches me, my skin crawls. When he talks about our future together, about our wedding that we're supposed to reschedule, I want to run. But I can't remember why. I can't remember anything about our relationship." Michael finished securing the bandage and pulled her hospital gown back into place. Memory after trauma can be tricky. Sometimes your mind protects you by blocking things out, but sometimes your body remembers even when your mind doesn't. "You think my body is trying to tell me something? I think you should trust your instincts." He sat down in the chair beside her bed. "Victoria, that first night when you woke up, you said something to me. Do you remember?" She shook her head. "You said danger, like you were trying to warn me about something. Or maybe warn yourself." Victoria's eyes widened. "I did?" "Yes, and I've been thinking about that a lot. About why you'd say that the moment you woke up. Dr. Chen, are you saying you think someone tried to hurt me? That my accident wasn't an accident? I don't know. But I think something isn't right here. And I think maybe you knew that before the crash." Victoria looked down at her hands, twisting the edge of the blanket. "I keep having these flashes. Not really memories, more like feelings. Fear, anger, the sound of squealing brakes, but I can't connect them to anything concrete. Don't force it. It'll come back when you're ready." Over the next week, Michael found himself spending more time in Victoria's room than any of his other patients. He told himself it was because her case was complex, because she needed careful monitoring. But the truth was simpler. He was worried about her. And maybe he was starting to care about her in a way that went beyond doctor and patient. She was smart, he discovered. Sharp and quick-witted once she regained her strength. She asked intelligent questions about her condition, wanted to understand every medication they gave her, and she had a dry sense of humor that made him laugh during his long shifts. "You're different from other doctors," she told him one evening. "The others come in, check their charts, smile politely, and leave. You actually talk to me, like I'm a person, not just a patient." "You are a person," Michael said. "A person who's been through something terrible. You deserve to be treated with dignity. Is that what you were doing when I was in the coma? I heard the nurses talking. They said you changed my bandages every day, that you talked to me even though I couldn't respond." Michael felt his cheeks warm. "I do that with all my patients, but you did it especially carefully with me. They said the previous doctors had been following my family's instructions to minimal contact. But you refused. You insisted on proper care. Your wound was getting infected. I couldn't just ignore that. Victoria studied him for a long moment. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else was just following orders. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Victoria's accident, about Richard's strange behavior, about the neglected wound and the family's odd instructions. Finally, at 2 a.m, he gave up on sleep and did something he probably shouldn't have done. He accessed the police report on Victoria's accident. What he found made his blood run cold. The accident had happened on a clear day, on a straight stretch of road. Victoria had been an experienced driver with no history of reckless behavior. Yet somehow her car had accelerated suddenly and crashed into a barrier at high speed. The police had ruled it an accident, noting possible mechanical failure, but no thorough investigation had been done, because the family hadn't wanted one. Richard had specifically requested that the car be destroyed quickly, citing the traumatic nature of the accident. The police had complied. Michael sat back in his chair, his mind racing. A car that suddenly accelerated on its own. A wealthy fiancé who stood to gain from Victoria's incapacitation. A wound that had been deliberately neglected. And a patient who woke up with the word danger on her lips. He couldn't prove anything, but he knew something was wrong. The next morning, Michael arrived at the hospital to find Richard in Victoria's room, sitting very close to her bed. Victoria looked pale, uncomfortable. We were just discussing Victoria's discharge, Richard said smoothly when Michael entered. She's made remarkable progress. We think it's time she continued her recovery at home with private care. Absolutely not, Michael said firmly. Victoria has been in a coma for 6 months. She needs continued medical supervision, physical therapy, counseling. She's nowhere near ready for discharge. We can provide all of that privately, Richard countered, better than what she'd get here. No, Victoria said suddenly. Both men turned to look at her. I want to stay here. With Dr. Chen, Richard's expression darkened. Victoria, darling, you're not thinking clearly. Your memory isn't fully back yet. Let me handle this. My memory might not be back, but I know what I want. And I want to stay here. Richard stood up, his jaw tight. We'll discuss this later when you're feeling more yourself. He turned to Michael. I'll be speaking to the hospital administration about this. Victoria's family has been very generous to this hospital. I'm sure they'll be cooperative about her discharge. After he left, Victoria let out a shaky breath. He's going to force me to leave, isn't he? Not if I can help it, Michael said. But even as he said it, he knew he might not have that power. The Harrington family had donated millions to the hospital. If they wanted Victoria discharged, the administration would likely comply. Michael, Victoria said, and it was the first time she'd used his first name. I need to tell you something. I've been having more flashes of memory, and they're all bad. Arguments with Richard about money, feeling watched, being afraid in my own home, and yesterday I remembered something specific. What? I was in my car. I was trying to brake, but the brakes weren't working. And just before the crash, I remember thinking that Richard had done something to my car. I can't remember why I thought that or what exactly he'd done, but I knew. In that moment, I knew he'd tried to kill me. Michael felt his suspicions crystallize into certainty. We need to tell someone. The police, your family, someone? Who would believe me? I have no proof. Just fragments of memory from 6 months ago. And Richard has spent those 6 months playing the devoted fiancé. He's been here every day, I'm told. He's talked to the press about how much he loves me. If I accuse him now, everyone will think my brain damage has made me paranoid. She was right, and Michael knew it. They needed evidence, not just suspicions and fractured memories. Then we need to be smart about this, Michael said. We need to keep you safe while we figure out what really happened. And we need to do it carefully because if Richard suspects you're remembering, he might try something else. Victoria nodded, but Michael could see the fear in her eyes, and he made a decision in that moment. He'd protect her, whatever it took, even if it meant putting his own career, his own life on the line. Because some patients became more than just cases. Some patients became people you'd do anything to keep safe. Michael spent the next 2 days carefully documenting everything. Every interaction between Victoria and Richard. Every inconsistency in her medical records from before he took over her care. Every detail of the accident report. He kept it all on a secure drive, telling no one what he was doing. Victoria's memory was coming back in pieces. She remembered discovering discrepancies in her company's financial records. She remembered confronting Richard about missing money. She remembered the look on his face when she'd told him their engagement was over, that she was going to report him to the authorities. It was $2 million. She told Michael one evening, her voice shaky. $2 million that he'd been siphoning from my company over the past year. He'd been so clever about it, hiding it in fake vendor accounts, spreading it thin so no one would notice. But I did notice. I've always been good with numbers. Do you have proof of this? I did. I had files, documentation, everything I needed to prosecute him. But I don't know where they are now. Probably destroyed in the accident, or maybe Richard got to them first. Michael leaned forward. Your assistant, do you trust her? Grace? Yes, absolutely. She's been with me for 5 years. Could she have copies of those files? Victoria's eyes lit up. She might. I had her research some of the vendors. She would have kept records. Then we need to contact her, quietly. They decided to wait until late at night when fewer people were around. Michael brought his personal phone, not the hospital one that could be monitored. Grace answered on the third ring, her voice groggy. Hello? Grace, it's Victoria. There was a long pause, then a sound like crying. Oh my God, Victoria. I heard you woke up, but Richard said you weren't ready for visitors yet. I've been so worried about you. I'm okay. But Grace, I need your help. Do you still have those files I asked you to research? About the vendor accounts? Yes, I kept everything. I didn't know what to do with them after your accident. Richard said to destroy them. Said they were irrelevant now, but something told me to keep them. I have them stored at my apartment. Don't tell anyone you still have them. And don't bring them to the hospital. Richard can't know about this. Victoria, what's going on? Victoria looked at Michael, who nodded encouragingly. I think Richard caused my accident. I think he tampered with my car because I was going to expose what he'd been doing. Grace gasped. I knew something was wrong. The day before your accident, you called me and told me to make copies of everything. You said if anything happened to you, I should go to the police. But when you ended up in a coma, I didn't know what to do. Richard kept saying you'd been stressed, working too hard, that there was nothing suspicious about the accident. I almost believed him. Listen to me carefully, Michael interjected. Don't come to the hospital. Don't contact Richard or anyone in Victoria's family. Keep those files safe and wait to hear from us. After the call ended, Michael and Victoria sat in silence for a moment. They had evidence now, or at least they knew where to find it, but that also meant they were in more danger. If Richard suspected Victoria was remembering, if he knew Grace still had those files. Michael's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was past midnight. No one should be coming in now unless there was an emergency. Come in, Victoria called. But Michael noticed her hand reaching for the call button, ready to press it if needed. A nurse Michael didn't recognize entered the room. She was young, wearing scrubs that looked brand new. She carried a syringe filled with clear liquid. Time for your medication, the nurse said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. What medication? Michael asked, standing up. I'm her doctor, and I haven't prescribed anything that needs to be administered at midnight. The nurse's smile faltered. Dr. Patterson ordered it. To help her sleep. Show me the order. It's in the system. Then you won't mind if I verify it. Michael pulled out his phone and opened the hospital's medical database. There was no order from Dr. Patterson, no medication scheduled for Victoria at this hour. Who are you? Michael demanded. And what's really in that syringe? The nurse's expression changed from friendly to cold in an instant. This is none of your business, doctor. Step aside. I'm calling security. Michael reached for the call button, but the nurse moved faster. She lunged toward Victoria, syringe raised. Michael threw himself between them, knocking the nurse's arm aside. The syringe clattered to the floor. The nurse tried to grab it, but Michael was already hitting the emergency call button, and alarms began blaring throughout the hospital. The nurse ran from the room just as security. Thai guards came rushing down the hallway. Michael shouted at them to stop her, gave them a description. They took off after her, but Michael knew she'd probably get away. She'd been too prepared, too professional. Victoria was shaking, her face pale. What was in that syringe? I don't know, but we'll find out. Michael picked it up carefully with a tissue, making sure not to contaminate it. This is evidence. This proves someone is trying to hurt you. Within an hour, the hospital was in chaos. Dr. Patterson arrived, looking disheveled and angry. Security reviewed camera footage. The police were called, and Michael had the syringe sent to the lab for analysis. The fake nurse had gotten away, but the cameras had caught her face. The police ran it through their database and found nothing. No identification, no matches. She was a professional hired for this job. By morning, the test results came back. The syringe contained a massive dose of insulin, enough to send Victoria into fatal hypoglycemic shock. It would have looked like a complication from her coma, a tragic medical event. No one would have suspected murder. "We need to move you," Michael told Victoria. "You're not safe here anymore." "Where can I go?" "Richard will find me wherever I go. He has resources, connections. Then we need to get ahead of him. We need to get Grace's evidence and go to the police before he can make another move." But it was too late. That afternoon, 2 men in expensive suits arrived at the hospital with a court order. Victoria's family, at Richard's urging, had declared her incompetent due to brain damage from her accident. They were transferring her to a private facility abroad for specialized treatment. The order was legal, airtight. Richard's lawyers had made sure of it. "You can't do this," Michael argued with Dr. Patterson. "She's not incompetent. She's lucid, aware, making her own decisions." "The family has legal guardianship," Dr. Patterson said wearily. "We have to comply. She'll die if you send her with them. Don't you understand? Someone just tried to kill her last night. The police are investigating that, but legally we have no grounds to hold her against her family's wishes." Michael looked at Victoria, who was sitting on her bed fully dressed for the first time since waking up. She looked terrified but determined. "I'm not going," she said quietly. "Victoria," Dr. Patterson began, but she cut him off. "I'm checking myself out, against medical advice. I can do that, right?" "You're under your family's guardianship," one of the lawyers said. "You can't make that decision." "Then I'm contesting the guardianship. I'll get my own lawyer. That could take weeks. In the meantime, the court order stands." Michael felt something inside him snap. He'd spent his entire career following rules, respecting authority, doing things the right way. But the right way was going to get Victoria killed. "Then I guess we're not doing this legally," he said. Everyone turned to stare at him. "Michael, no," Dr. Patterson said. "Think about what you're doing." "I am thinking about it. I'm thinking about my oath to do no harm, and letting her go with these people would definitely cause harm." He walked to Victoria's bedside and held out his hand. "Do you trust me?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." "Then let's go." What happened next would become hospital legend. Michael Chen, a respected resident with a perfect record, helped his patient walk right out of Metropolitan Hospital. They went down the back stairwell, avoiding the main elevators where security would be waiting. Michael had called his sister Linda from the stairwell, and she was waiting in the parking garage with her car. Behind them, they could hear shouting, security being mobilized, Dr. Patterson yelling for someone to stop them. But Michael didn't stop. He'd made his choice. Victoria's life was worth more than his career, his reputation, his future. They made it to Linda's car just as hospital security poured into the parking garage. Linda peeled out, heading for the exit. Michael looked back once and saw Dr. Patterson standing at the entrance, his face a mixture of anger and something that might have been respect. "Where are we going?" Victoria asked, breathing hard. "Somewhere safe," Michael said. "And then we're getting those files from Grace, and then we're ending this." Linda glanced at them in the rearview mirror. "You know you just threw away your medical career, right?" "I know," Michael said, looking at Victoria. "But some things are more important than a career." Victoria reached over and squeezed his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "For believing me. For protecting me." "That's what doctors do," Michael said. "We protect our patients, no matter what it costs." Linda drove them to her apartment across town, checking the rearview mirror constantly to make sure they weren't being followed. She was 3 years younger than Michael, sharp and fearless in a way that had always made him both proud and terrified for her safety. "Okay," she said, once they were safely inside her small but tidy apartment. "Someone want to tell me exactly what we're running from? And don't say it's complicated, because I left a very important study session for this." Michael filled her in on everything while Victoria sat on the couch, looking exhausted but alert. Linda listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "So let me get this straight," she said when he finished. "Rich fiancé embezzles money, gets caught, Tries to kill his girlfriend, puts her in a 6-month coma, then tries to kill her again when she wakes up and starts remembering. Is that about right? That's the summary, yes, Victoria said. And you have proof of all this? We have proof of the embezzlement. Grace has the files. The attempted murder is harder to prove, but we have the syringe from last night, and hopefully the police can trace it back to whoever Richard hired. Linda pulled out her laptop. Okay, first things first, we need to get those files from Grace, but we have to assume Richard knows about her. He's probably watching her apartment, her office, anywhere Victoria would go for help. So how do we get the files? Michael asked. We don't. We have Grace take them straight to the police along with a sworn statement. Then we get Victoria somewhere safe and let the authorities handle Richard. It sounded simple, but they all knew it wouldn't be. Richard had money, influence, and clearly no moral boundaries. But it was their best shot. Linda called Grace from a secure line, walking her through exactly what to do. Grace was scared but determined. She'd watched Victoria lie unconscious for 6 months, watched Richard play the devoted fiancé while stealing from Victoria's company. She wanted justice. I'm going to the police station right now, Grace said. I'll tell them everything. Make sure you mention the attempted murder last night, Linda instructed. That ties everything together. And Grace, be careful. Don't go home after this. Stay with friends or family until this is resolved. After they hung up, there was nothing to do but wait. Victoria had fallen asleep on Linda's couch, completely exhausted. Michael sat in a chair nearby, watching her breathe, still amazed that she was alive and awake after everything. You really care about her, don't you? Linda said quietly, sitting down beside him. She's my patient. Michael, you just committed career suicide for her. She's more than your patient. Michael was quiet for a long moment. Maybe, I don't know. Everything's happened so fast. A week ago, she was in a coma. Now we're running for our lives. Well, for what it's worth, I think she's worth it. Anyone who can survive 6 months in a coma and wake up ready to fight is pretty special. 2 hours later, Linda's phone rang. It was Grace. I'm at the police station, she said, her voice shaking. I gave them everything. They're taking it seriously, Michael. They're sending officers to arrest Richard right now. Relief flooded through Michael. Thank you, Grace. You probably just saved Victoria's life. But the relief was short-lived. 10 minutes later, Michael's phone buzzed with a news alert. Richard Sterling had posted bail within an hour of his arrest. The charges were embezzlement and conspiracy. The attempted murder charge hadn't stuck yet because they couldn't definitively prove Richard had hired the fake nurse. He's out, Michael said, showing Linda the alert. He's going to come after us. Then we need better protection, Linda said. She made a call to a friend who worked at the district attorney's office, explaining the situation. Within an hour, they had protective custody arranged. Police officers arrived at Linda's apartment to escort them to a safe house. Victoria woke up as they were preparing to leave. What's happening? Richard's been arrested, but he made bail, Michael explained. We're going somewhere safer until the trial. The next 3 weeks were strange, existing in a kind of limbo. They stayed in a small house on the outskirts of the city, protected by police officers who changed shifts every 12 hours. Linda stayed with them, using her legal knowledge to help build the case against Richard. She was interning at a law firm and managed to get them connected with a prosecutor who took their case seriously. During those weeks, Michael watched Victoria grow stronger every day. She did physical therapy exercises to regain her full strength. She worked with Linda to organize the evidence. And slowly her memory came back completely. She remembered everything now. The discovery of Richard's theft, the confrontation, the fear in the days leading up to the accident, the moment when she realized her brakes had been cut. She also told Michael more about herself. Her childhood growing up with wealthy but distant parents. Her struggle to prove herself capable of running the family company. Her loneliness that had made her vulnerable to someone like Richard in the first place. I thought he loved me, she said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The police officers had stepped away to give them privacy, but looking back I can see it was always about the money. He was always asking about the business, about my inheritance. I just didn't want to see it. You're not the first person to be fooled by someone they loved, Michael said. That's not your fault. Still, I should have been smarter. I'm supposed to be smart. Being smart doesn't make you immune to manipulation. It just means you recognize it eventually, which you did. Victoria looked at him and Michael felt that familiar pull he'd been trying to ignore for weeks. She was his patient. He'd saved her life. Getting involved with her would be complicated, potentially inappropriate. But then she reached over and took his hand, and Michael realized he didn't care about appropriate anymore. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For believing me when everyone else thought I was confused. For risking everything to keep me safe." "I'd do it again," Michael said, in a heartbeat. They sat like that for a long time, hands intertwined, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to black. The trial took another 2 months. Richard's lawyers were good, but the evidence was overwhelming. Grace's files proved the embezzlement beyond doubt. The police had tracked the fake nurse to a woman Richard had hired through criminal connections. And a mechanic who'd been paid to cut Victoria's brake lines came forward when he learned she'd survived and was willing to testify. Richard was convicted on all counts: embezzlement, attempted murder, and conspiracy. The judge gave him 25 years, noting the particularly cold-blooded nature of his crimes. Victoria was there for the sentencing, sitting in the front row with Michael beside her. When the verdict was read, she didn't cheer or celebrate. She just sat quietly, finally able to close this chapter of her life. Afterward, they stood on the courthouse steps and Victoria turned to Michael. "What happens now?" "What do you mean?" "With you, with us. You gave up your medical career for me. The hospital fired you. You're facing an ethics investigation. I owe you everything and I don't know how to repay that." Michael smiled. "You don't owe me anything. But as for what happens now, I have some ideas." Those ideas started to take shape quickly. Victoria used her influence to get Michael's case reviewed by the hospital board. She testified about how he'd saved her life, not just by waking her from the coma, but by protecting her when no one else would. She talked about the neglect she'd suffered under the previous doctors who'd followed her family's instructions without questioning them. The board reinstated Michael with a formal apology. More than that, they offered him a position as an attending physician, skipping the usual years of additional residency. It was unprecedented, but Victoria's testimony, combined with Michael's flawless record before the incident, made it possible. Victoria threw herself into restructuring her company. She implemented new oversight procedures, hired an independent audit firm, and personally reviewed every major financial decision. She also started a foundation dedicated to helping victims of financial fraud and domestic violence, 2 causes that now held deep personal meaning for her. And through it all, she and Michael grew closer. They took things slowly, both aware of the complicated history between them. Their relationship had started with him as her doctor, her protector. They needed to make sure what they felt was real and not just trauma bonding. But 6 months after Richard's conviction, Michael took Victoria to dinner at a quiet restaurant. Over dessert, she reached across the table and took his hand. "I've been thinking," she said, "about that night when I woke up. Do you remember what you were doing?"
"Changing your bandages. You were taking care of me."
"Talking to me like I was a person, not just a body in a bed. And you've been taking care of me ever since." "But Michael, I don't need a caretaker anymore. I'm strong now, healthy, independent." Michael felt his heart sink. Was she saying she didn't need him anymore? But then she smiled, that beautiful smile he'd fallen in love with. "What I need now is a partner, an equal. Someone who sees me not as a patient or a victim or a rich heiress, but just as Victoria. Do you think you could do that?" Michael laughed, relief and joy flooding through him. "I think I've been doing that for a while now." "Good," she said. "Because I'm in love with you, Dr. Chen. And I needed to make sure you were in love with me too, not just with the idea of protecting me." "I'm in love with you," Michael said without hesitation. "All of you. Your strength, your intelligence, your terrible sense of humor. Everything." "My sense of humor is excellent," she protested, but she was grinning. A year later, they stood together at the opening ceremony of the new Victoria Harrington Medical Wing at Metropolitan Hospital. She donated $10 million to fund better patient care, better equipment, and better training for doctors like Michael who refused to take shortcuts even when powerful people wanted them to. Dr. Patterson, who'd become a good friend despite their rocky moment during Victoria's escape, gave a speech about the importance of doctors who put patients first always. He looked directly at Michael as he said it, and Michael felt a swell of pride. Later, as the ceremony wound down and guests mingled over champagne, Victoria pulled Michael aside. "I have something to show you," she said, leading him down a quiet hallway. She stopped in front of a plaque on the wall. It read, "The Dr. Michael Chen Patient Advocacy Award, given annually to the physician who demonstrates exceptional dedication to patient care and welfare." Michael stared at it, too moved to speak. "You changed my life," Victoria said softly. "You saw me when I couldn't see myself. You fought for me when no one else would. And you taught me that sometimes the right thing to do is the hardest thing to do. I wanted to make sure other patients have doctors like you. Doctors who won't look away no matter what." Michael pulled her close, holding her tight. "We changed each other's lives," he said. "You taught me that some things are worth any risk. That courage isn't about being fearless, it's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway." They stood there for a long time, in the quiet hallway of the hospital where their story had begun, where Michael had changed a simple bandage and somehow woken up more than just a patient. He'd woken up his own courage, his own willingness to fight for what mattered. And as he looked at Victoria, healthy and strong and smiling, he knew he'd make the same choice again. Every single time. Because some patients stop being patients and become something more. They become friends, partners. Maybe even, if you're very lucky, they become your whole world. And Victoria Harrington had definitely become Michael Chen's whole world. He tucked her into bed like she was one of his pediatric patients. As Nina drifted off to sleep, she felt him kiss her forehead one more time. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised. And for the first time, Nina let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, fairy tales could happen in real life after all.